evening. Welcome to APTN National News. I'm Melissa Ridgen. Blockades and protests have shut down rail traffic in some places for 2 weeks now, and pressure has been brought on the federal government to resolve the crisis. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau held a press conference today. Todd Lamourand reports on what sounded like an ultimatum from him.
The theme in Trudeau's remarks, that patience has run out.
The situation as it currently stands is unacceptable and untenable. Everyone involved is worried. Canadians have been patient. Our government has been patient. But it has been 2 weeks, and the barricades need to come down now.
The Prime Minister repeated his calls for collaboration, citing the RCMP standing down as a show of respect.
But as a federal government, we have exhausted our capacity to engage in a positive, substantive, active way at our initiative to resolve this. And we will be, well, the onus is now shifted onto Indigenous leadership.
Trudeau did not give a specific timeline for blockades to end and said police forces will exercise discretion.
Injunctions must be obeyed. Barricades must come down, but we must look to see this happen peacefully. We must look to be able to continue on this path of reconciliation that is not and will never be easy, but that requires a partnership and a trust that needs to be built on positive actions.
He also distinguished between two types of protests, one based on Indigenous people's grievances that are legitimate and must be addressed.
And then there are other protests that use or engage with Indigenous protests to call out a particular project with which they disagree, to advance a particular point of view.
Earlier today during question period, the Conservatives hammered away at what they say is Liberal inaction, which is emboldening lawbreakers and bullies.
Our economy is being shut down, jobs are being lost, and the voices of First Nations people is being ignored. The best interest of Canadians is being ignored. The Liberal inaction on this is disgraceful. When will this Liberal government stand up for law and order, stand up for First Nations rights, stand up for jobs, and end these illegal blockades?
Both the Bloc Québécois and NDP asked when the Prime Minister would meet face-to-face with Indigenous leaders.
Then, weeks ago, when we asked the Prime Minister to step up to de-escalate the situation in Wet'suwet'en territories, he said it wasn't his problem. Mr. Speaker, it was then. It is now. When will he meet with the hereditary chiefs?
But Trudeau made no commitment to personally meet with them. Todd Lamourand, APTN National News, Ottawa.
Minutes after Trudeau's press conference, Wet'suwet'en hereditary chiefs and Mohawk allies held their own in Tyendinaga, Mohawk territory. Jamie Pashagumskum was there.
The day started with a tobacco ceremony at sunrise and then a meeting at 10 a.m. between the Tyendinaga Mohawks and the Wet'suwet'en hereditary chiefs. Now, media wasn't allowed at this meeting, but there was a press conference held afterwards where Hereditary Chief Was read from a statement. Now, what that statement basically said was that their demands remain the same. They want the RCMP off their territory, they want CGL work to cease, and they want them gone also. Now, on the side of the Mohawk land defenders, they say their demands haven't changed either. They say that they want the RCMP off Wet'suwet'en territory. Now, what needs to happen then is that once they receive confirmation from the Wet'suwet'en people that the RCMP have pulled out, then they will move to de-escalation of their demonstration. And for that, they would want to meet with Mark Miller. Now, the Wet'suwet'en hereditary chiefs have said that they will be willing to meet with Canada once their demands are met. And they said this doesn't specifically have to be with Justin Trudeau, but they did ask for Indigenous Services Minister Mark Miller and Indigenous Crown Relations Minister Carolyn Bennett. So where earlier today Trudeau said that the fate of these situations now rests in the hands of Indigenous leaders, from what we heard today, Indigenous leaders are putting the onus back on Canada. Jamie Pashagumskum, APTN National News, Tyndonega.
Meanwhile, in Saint-Lambert, Quebec, just south of Montreal, a group of activists are in their third day of blocking trains. Here's Lindsay Richardson.
While both the hereditary chiefs and the Prime Minister held afternoon briefings, all eyes were on the frontline protesters holding vigil on commuter train tracks in Kanesatake, where things remain peaceful, and in Saint-Lambert, where things started to escalate by mid-afternoon. For the second day in a row, this makeshift encampment erected on a CN rail line forced the cancellation of all rail traffic, much to the chagrin of one outspoken resident who decided to set up his own counter-protest, pushing for the reopening of the tracks while touting bilingual signs reading, "This is not the natives, and this is not native land. Respect."
Enough is enough. We got to open this up. That's all. And let the police react to open it up. And I'll stay here until it's opened up. And if people want to come and join me, I'm going to be here all weekend if it happens.
The site itself remains surrounded by both undercover and on-duty police officers who gave no indication that they would mobilize to enforce the injunction order that was handed down yesterday, much to Walsh's chagrin.
The law is the law. There was a bailiff here last night giving out papers to everybody, you know what I mean? And they all got notices to leave the site, and they're still here. So that's what I don't understand.
While demonstrators for the most part remained on the tracks, not giving any media comment, they got a little too close when APTN cameraman Robbie Purdon stepped off the sidewalk and onto a nearby hill to get a better shot. This is what happened then. Whoa, whoa, don't touch the lens, please, he says, as a protester reaches to block the shot, then doing the same for a nearby photographer. Meanwhile, someone tries to disconnect his camera battery. You're just trying to get attention for nothing, said a protester, pointing to the designated media zone. Just go over there like everyone else, they added. Another reporter approached and pointed out that they're the ones blocking the train tracks. A still photographer says, "You came over here to bother me while I was doing my job. It's you who's bothering us," they responded. How are we bothering you? APTN asked as more demonstrators surrounded. When a scuffle broke out, APTN retreated, waiting to see if the situation would devolve. According to the Montreal Solidarité Wet'suwet'en Twitter account, police have returned to the site with batons in hand, are blocking streets, and are preparing to enforce only what demonstrators are referring to as, quote, colonial powers. The situation as it stands is still developing. For now, I'm Lindsay Richardson with APTN National News in Montreal.
APTN's Todd Lamarand asked the Prime Minister what happens if police go in with a heavy hand and trigger a volatile situation in Wet'suwet'en or with any of the blockades that are up, and what is Canada's roadmap going forward? Here's the answer.
Prime Minister, you just said that you've stopped making overtures and the barricades must come down. What happens, though, if we go in there with a heavy hand and something like the Oka crisis or something worse happens?
That is a concern we have had from the very beginning, and quite frankly why we have not responded to calls by a number of politicians to engage enforcement action immediately. We have gone through exhausting every possibility for dialogue, for engagement, for finding peaceful solutions to de-escalate this every step of the way. And we remain open to that, but we are waiting for Indigenous leadership to show that it also understands. The onus is on them. We will be there to discuss, but the barricades must come down.
Now, unfortunately, I'm old enough to remember all these events, a lot of events like Oka, Ipperwash, Caledonia, Idle No More. But there seems to be, after every crisis is solved, there's a collective memory loss by government, by everybody. So what's the roadmap going forward so that, 2, 3, 5 years from now, we're not sitting here once again grilling you about the same thing, or your successor or whomever?
I think we've demonstrated a new roadmap over the past 5 years, one that is the difficult journey of reconciliation, one where we engage as partners with Indigenous communities and leadership and peoples to move forward on resolving historic land claims, on closing gaps between investments in provincial education systems per student and in Indigenous students, investing in infrastructure, housing, health services, and doing so in a way that puts Indigenous leadership at the center of that path forward. Reconciliation is a journey, and there are going to be difficult moments on that journey because it represents a significant shift in the way Canada works. But our capacity to work together requires us to engage, to, yes, recognize the historic wrongs, but to be present, to fix them and move forward. That is what we will remain focused on. That is what we have focused on these past 2 weeks, and that is what I certainly hope we will continue to see, not just in the coming days, but in the coming months.
Let's go back to that press conference at Tyendinaga that followed the Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's call to bring down the rail blockades. Leaders from the Mohawk Territory and Wet'suwet'en Grizzly Bear House where the CGL pipeline is being built. They're reacting to the Prime Minister's words. Let's take a look.
And we heard Prime Minister Trudeau just a little while ago talking about the inconvenience that Canada has suffered. However, there is a difference between inconvenience and injustice. Total difference. Don't confuse one with the other. There's a big difference. He did mention the historic wrongs of the past. And he did mention a few things as well that I will go through. Today, the Mohawk people and the Wet'suwet'en people stood in solidarity at the Mohawk Council House in Tyendinaga to affirm that they will not stand by and watch while Wet'suwet'en title and rights over their lands are ignored and while human rights abuses continue to happen in the Wet'suwet'en territory. Contrary to the announcement by the BC RCMP on February 20th, 2020, that they are withdrawing from Wet'suwet'en territory. The hereditary chiefs of the Wet'suwet'en confirmed at the meeting that the BC RCMP and the CIRG have in fact increased harassment, made illegal arrests, increased surveillance, and monitoring of Wet'suwet'en people and their invited guests. This is completely unacceptable and far from the show of good faith and contradicts the announcement by the BC RCMP. Both the Wet'suwet'en hereditary chiefs and the Mohawk people of Tyendinaga remain deeply concerned by the myriad of laws that Canada has broken, including Wet'suwet'en law, the Canadian Constitution, the Supreme Court of Canada, Delgamuukw decision of 1997, UNDRIP, and the Geneva Convention on Genocide. They want to remind Canada and the world that Wet'suwet'en land was never ceded or surrendered, and as such, Canada's actions amount to an illegal occupation in Wet'suwet'en territory. They also want to remind the Canadian government that the rail line shutdowns could have been ended many days ago if only Canada, BC, CGL, and the RCMP had honored their own laws as well as the respected Wet'suwet'en laws.
The organization that represents 34 Anishinaabe and Dakota First Nations in Manitoba has weighed in on the crisis in Wet'suwet'en territory and the rail blockades across this country. They had some harsh words. The Southern Chiefs organization is calling the actions of the federal government and RCMP, quote, the epitome of oppression toward Turtle Island's First Peoples. Grand Chief Jerry Daniels believes the blockades are a result of the frustration that people feel for the broader issue of the Canadian government's failure to honor and respect past and present agreements with First Nations.
It's a symptom of Canada's inability to engage First Nations meaningfully. And I think that when people who are at the margins of society have no other alternative, then they have to find a way to be heard. And this has been a very effective way to gain some international attention to the issue.
APTN Investigates tonight shines light on hate in Canada. We'll talk to the reporter behind the story after the break, and here's a look at the weather in the east and central parts of the country tomorrow. On the east coast, we've got -5 and rain for St. John's, 1 and some cloud for Halifax. La Grande River, -6 and snow in Nukjuak, -11 and sunshine. Rouyn-Noranda, 1 degree, same with Val-d'Or. Montreal, mix of sun and cloud, 1 as well. Toronto, 4 degrees and sunshine. North Bay, 0, mix of sun and cloud. Sioux Lookout, 2 degrees and sunshine. Kapuskasing, 4 and sunny. Norway House and God's Lake, mix of sun and cloud, and 1 degree, -18 and snow for Churchill. 2 for Barons River and Princess Harbour, 2 for Brandon. Sunshine there in Brandon. Welcome back. White supremacy has a long history in Canada, just like our neighbours to the south and, of course, elsewhere in the world. Experts say that hate groups are on the rise here in Canada. APTN Investigates reporter John Murray wanted to know why. He joins me now to talk about a documentary that he did called Inside Hate. John, what made you want to tackle white supremacy in this episode of your In Focus, or your Investigate, sorry?
I mean, one thing I have to say is so many of our stories here at APTN News and APTN Investigates and what you cover in Focus focuses on individual discrimination. But, you know, also there's like the case of Cindy Blackstock and the First Nations Caring Society, where discrimination is in law and policy. But on top of that, we have our current conditions with Trump in the U.S., Bolsonaro in Brazil, and, of course, with the Wet'suwet'en supporters. Mm-hmm. And even yesterday, we had a federal conservative leadership candidate who seemed to endorse vigilantism. Mm.
Is this, I mean, I think people might be confused. How do you box it out? What is hate versus what is intolerance versus what is racism? Is that something that went through your head as you were doing this story?
Absolutely. You know, there was definitely this you know, they all interconnect, but I mean, you know, part of the thing was some of these people, especially historically, were raised with some sort of childhood trauma or exposed to violence as a youth. So, you know, the hate kind of can stem from different places. So,
you spoke to former members of hate groups in Canada. What were the reasons they joined?
Yeah. Well, again, like I said before, you know, childhood trauma and exposure to violence as youth. But of course, there's also what's happening now with all these online environments, social media, chat forums, and stuff like that, mm-hmm. where more and more people are inclined to listen to some of these extreme voices.
How is Canada's history racist? You get into that in this documentary too.
Yes, we do. And, you know, it goes way back. It goes back to way before Canada even came to be, really. There was a papal declaration by the Pope way back in the 15th century that established the doctrine of discovery that said that only Christians can claim land. If it's not claimed by a Christian, it's unclaimed land. Mm-hmm. Jump forward to 1867, Canada becomes a country, and again, more law and policy, the Indian Act, reservation system. We've seen internment camps for Japanese, Chinese, and even Ukrainians. Mm-hmm. And of course, something else that's also worth mentioning, though, is tough economic times. It happened with the rise of the KKK in the 20s. It was tough economic times. The 90s with the rise of Nazi skinheads, and now, where some of the voices are loudest, we're seeing a downfall in the economic, in the oil sands and energy sector here in Alberta, and this is where some of the loudest voices are.
Can't wait to see your documentary tonight after the news, and then part 2 airs next Friday after APTN National News 2. Thanks for joining us, John.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Melissa.
After the break, an Alberta Métis family took Toronto by storm to film Canada's Family Feud game show. And here's the rest of tomorrow's weather for the west and the north before that. Off to northern Alberta, we got 1 and snow for Fort Chip, 0 and sunshine for Peace River. 4 and snow for Edmonton, 6s and sunshine for Calgary and Lethbridge. 8 and rain for Campbell River, 4 and rain for Kamloops. Prince Rupert, cloudy and 5 degrees, 1 and sunshine for Fort Nelson, 4 and cloud in Prince Rupert. -2 in the mix of sun and clouds for Beaver Creek, 1s for Whitehorse and Watson Lake. -11 and snow for Norman Wells and Watee. Trout Lake, 2, sunshine. Fort McPherson, -12 and snow, -16 with a mix of sun and cloud in Paulatuck. Baker Lake, -30 and clear skies, -32 for Repulse Bay and Whale Cove, it's sunshine there. Iqaluit, -31 with clear skies. Arctic Bay, -28 and snow. Welcome back. Game show lovers are in for a treat as a Métis family is set to compete on Family Feud. The Perreault family traveled from Alberta to film the show, which airs this coming Tuesday. Elena McDougall caught up with them in Toronto.
I'm Auntie Sandy, and I'm the leader of the Wolf Pack.
Oh! Meet the Perreaults, a pack of Métis cousins and an auntie who are sure to woo audiences on the game show Family Feud this week.
When you see Perreault family, St. Albert, Alberta, I just teared up, and it was so cool to see our name in lights and to represent.
And our family, we have so much fun together. We just let it all fly. We went out on that stage and we didn't leave anything behind.
In fact, the vivacious family put Métis culture front and center while competing on the show.
Sash, you bet. Métis. It is a symbol of the Red River Rebellion and the coming together of the Métis people, so we wear it to represent our ancestry.
Asked what's something you wish everybody knew about being Métis, Alicia had this to say.
The aspect that sometimes get lost about Métis culture is our sense of humor.
Who gave the funniest answer on the show?
The funniest? I'm gonna have to say that was perhaps me. It may have been the dumbest, but also funny.
While much fun was had, the family was happy together and deeply thankful for the experience.
We are so grateful to the show and to be super fans of it, and we watch it every night. We're following it along, and we think that CBC having Family Feud in Canada was a great idea.
A moose.
It's up there, you get the points. It's not, they're ready to steal. Show me a moose.
The Perreaults can't say who won, but they did say the entire experience had them dancing.
We jigged at the end. Yes.
On the dance.
They keep us on a very tight timeline, but at the very end, when all the families come out together, we broke out the jig.
You too, jig.
Okay.
Game show enthusiasts can watch the Perreaults compete this Tuesday, February 25th at 7:30 on CBC.
I know. I'm obsessed with the Métis Wolfpack. Can't wait to find out how they did on Tuesday. Well, that's all the time we have for your news tonight. I'm Melissa Ridge, and I'll see you back here for your APTN News Weekend tomorrow. Stay tuned now for APTN Investigates Inside Hate. Have a great night.